Paladin is by far and away my favorite class in Final Fantasy XIV. From the very moment I first created my character, I chose to go Gladiator, which of course became Paladin, and I did not touch any other classes until well after I'd finished Shadowbringers, and I still only had my Paladin at level 80 when I started to raid Savage. And well, I have well over 1,000 hours on playing Paladin, so I have some strong thoughts on it and pretty much everything about it. So today we will be looking at the Paladin class as a whole, from its story to how it plays, its job gear, and what the Paladin leveling experience is like. While this video is at the end of the day about my personal experience with the class, there will be quite a bit of information in here, so while this video isn't a guide, I think it's fair to call it an in-depth overview of the class and what it's like. Trust me when I say, not only do I not want to make guides, but I'm probably the worst possible person to do so. But without further ado, my name is Lokidum, and welcome to So This Is Paladin. It's my first time making a video like this, but I'm pretty confident it's turned out alright, hopefully. So to start off the video, we'll be going over the story for the Paladin class. This part of the video will contain spoilers for the Paladin job quests, so if you want to avoid those, please skip ahead to the next section of the video. But I'll quickly tell you what to expect in terms of the overall enjoyment of the story and quality of these quests. 1 to 30 is really good, but from there it goes off a cliff, as 30 to 50 is bad, 50 to 60 is actual garbage and possibly the worst questline in Final Fantasy XIV, then 60 to 70 is decent, but doesn't come close to hitting the same level of the initial quests. So getting into the level 1 to 30 quests, they start off with the Gladiator Guild Master Milla sending the player off to the quicksand to help Momodi deal with some ruffians from Limsa that have been harassing her customers. While confronting them, the player meets a mysterious man by the name of Aldous who scares off the leader of the ruffians with his strange blade. And while coming across as an absolute badass, the player is warned to not inform Milla of having met him. Aldous is pretty much the center of everything Gladiator related, as in the following quest the player becomes wrapped into all of the mayhem that surrounds him, and the situation evolves over the Gladiator quest, which see the player taking on groups looking to kill Aldous time and time again. But while each quest being filled with battles is a good thing, the story of these quests is quite hooking, to the point where this was my favorite part of the story while playing through early ARR. Aldous is very well written with a lot of depth to his character, and the mystery behind him is very interesting, and each interaction with him made me more and more invested in his character and the questline as a whole. And that is praise of his character on its own, let alone the dynamic he shares with the Guildmaster Milla, which is quite intriguing, as by the way they act around each other and their dialogue, it's hard to tell what exactly they were to each other in the past. The questline starts to climax, starting at level 20, when the situation around Aldous drags the player and the Gladiators Guild into a conflict with a criminal organization called the Alcron, which turns out to be led by Aldous' former gladiatorial partner, Leovold, who has strong ties to both Milla and Aldous and adds depth to their already existing dynamic. The remaining two quests see the player going up against the Alcron, engaging in a duel with the Leovold's right-hand cat girl named Zana, disproving and dispelling their lies about Aldous to get him executed, and then taking part in a final battle against the Alcron on the High Bridge in Eastern Thanalin, which is still one of my favorite solo duties and battle scenes in the game. It's a good old duel between Leovold and Aldous, which the latter wins, and instead of facing defeat, the former takes his own life. After the battle, we return to the guild and say our goodbyes to Aldous, who plans on leaving Ul'dah once more. But before he leaves, he tells the adventurer the last pieces of information to make clear how everything had come to this point, and clears up what exactly his relationship was with Leovold and Milla, and how it was torn apart. And that is where the questline ends. I think that the 1 to 30 Gladiator quests are fantastic with how they build and execute an exciting and extremely interesting story in a mere 6 short quests. The story is also propped up by its characters and their relationship with one another, and the sheer amount of depth each of the main cast has. And it is, in my opinion, the best character writing introduced with 2.0. It's just a shame that the questline is so short, as I feel it had the potential to become a proper and lengthy side story if they were willing to give it that time of day. That being preferably the entirety of the ARR, Gladiator, and Paladin questline, but they replaced it for crap. Moving on to the 30 to 50 quests, which award the player the Paladin Jobstone at the sacrifice of the quest no longer being good or memorable. The quests from a lore perspective are interesting, but I feel that the lore is disregarded and mistreated horribly in this questline. For the first time ever, the Sultan Sworn, a group of paladins dedicated to the Sultan of Ul'dah, are willing to open their doors and teach their craft to those outside their ranks. So the player seeks out the captain of the Sultan Sworn elite, a man by the name of Shameless. To prove yourself worthy, you were told to journey south to an area nearby Little Alamigo and light the brazier. After lighting the brazier, a mysterious free paladin, that being one not sworn to the Sultanate, arrives and bestows upon the player a crystal, asking them to show it to Shameless before very quickly leaving. So we go back, and having proved our worth, Shameless gives us a crystal that looks similar to the one we were already given. So we show Shameless the crystal that we already have in our possession, and he suddenly gets very angry. We are told the free paladin we just met is a traitor and a thief, and we were asked to assist the Sultan Sworn to bring him to justice, and of course we agree because we don't have a choice or any dialogue options in ARR. Now, this does draw an interesting parallel to the Gladiator quest, for those quests also revolve around someone being hunted down, though this time we are helping the hunters rather than the hunted. If this was intentional, which it almost certainly was, it would have been a great way to somewhat show both sides of the story and both sides of a conflict. However, these quests ended up falling short of what had come previously, and felt as if they were disjointed and were just kinda boring, not telling the same kind of captivating tale that was told with Aldous. The quest objectives themselves are also not nearly as interesting, with them not having the battles that attributed to making the Gladiator quest so good, and are more just go here, kill X number of this mob to learn new ability, with some occasional lore drops and plot notes in the dialogue with Genlis before and after. After level 45 quests where you obtain the level 50 Paladin gear in the Gallant set, the story actually properly continues and is pretty much told entirely in the final 2 quests. These quests send the player to confront Solk Zagel, the free paladin you are after, but of course things go wrong as Genli suddenly becomes convinced you are in league with Solk and turns his blade against you. Yet another betrayal in Thanalin. I'm starting to think the Warrior of Light should just stay away from there. But regardless, the player pleads their innocence, which Genlis is having none of, and after defeating him and his knights, he still refuses to listen. That is, until one of his own men tries to kill him. But Solk Zagel appears and saves Genlis, and turns out the free paladin has been falsely accused of everything and is actually the good guy looking to take out the corruption in the Sultan Sworn, and that the Monardists are actually the ones behind everything bad. So the 3 of them go and kill the Monardist assassin, and the questline ends with the player being given the Valor set. I actually hate this ending even more in hindsight. They could have told an epic story of a rogue paladin you had to track down and earn your wings, literally in this case, as Paladin has them as an ability, but instead they just had filler quests with bits of lore sprinkled in, and when it actually chose to tell the story, it just had the main guy betray you for no reason without any build-up. And then, after saving him and him starting to like you again, everyone goes full 3 musketeers to go and save the day, which wouldn't have been bad if not for the fact that instead of building up to the major events, they just happened with no explanation, rhyme, or reason. Honestly, these quests had potential and could have been done far better if they just used the runtime they were given efficiently and effectively. But instead, they wasted 4 of 6 quests on just garbage, so it's completely the fault of the writers that this sucks. Honestly, when writing this section of the video, I had so many different ideas for how this could have been good swirling through my head, I'm just tempted to go and write an alternate version myself. The Heavensward Paladin quest, which of course is a level 50 to 60 quest chain, are, well, something I really don't have all that much to say about, as there really isn't all that much in general, aside from casually saying this is one of, if not the worst in questline in the entire game. The questline begins as Papashan fills the player in on the activities of Solk Zagel since the end of the ARR quest. The two had been keeping in touch about the Paladin's search for the legendary sword Oathkeeper, and apparently he had finally found it but stopped communicating soon after, so Papashan sends you north to Kurthus to try and find him. When arriving in Falcon's Nest, you were told that Solk Zagel was actually killed and then buried soon after, and the player journeys to pay their respects at the fallen Paladin's grave. It is there they save and meet a boy named Constant, who turns out to have been a student of the late Paladin. And with Solk Zagel dead, Constant remains committed to becoming a Paladin and taking up Solk Zagel's will and recovering the Oathkeeper, a goal which the player vows to help him accomplish. So the rest of the questline revolves around searching for the Oathkeeper, walking in the footsteps of Solk Zagel's final days, and stepping in as a pseudo-guardian, helping Constant find pieces of Solk Zagel's gear spread around the Kurthus Western Highlands, and overcoming all of the trials and the attackers associated with it. This is a far more emotional story than what was told with ARR, and the basic premise of falling in a dead man's last footsteps in the snow conjures up some somber yet beautiful imagery. And while not being all that great, these quests had a much better start than the 30 to 50 quests, and were shaping up to be an okay questline with some actual emotional punch to it. However, all of that is thrown away as a very bullshit twist has you dig up the Paladin's grave and discover a piece of armor buried instead of a corpse. And then Solk Zagel reveals himself then that he was alive the whole time, and that it was all a trial of sorts to have Constant want to find the Oathkeeper on his own, as the sword can only be wielded by a worthy Paladin, and that you and Constant must duel now. So you kick his ass, and then you have to duel Genlis, and you also kick his ass, and then at the very end, big surprise, you are the worthy Paladin who by lifting it can restore the Oathkeeper to its former shining glory, and then the sword can be returned to Ul'dah and everyone lived happily ever after. What the fuck? So the questline started out by telling an emotionally charged story based around a character the story never bothered to build or make interesting, so from the very beginning, it was already in danger of falling flat. But then they proceeded to write it decently well and make it compelling enough to have some emotional weight to it. Only to throw all of that out of the window for a bullshit happily ever after ending, killing any and all recovery of the 30 to 50 quests retroactively. Yet another questline that had potential and could have been incredible if 30 to 50 quests were better as a baseline, and then another one that could have been far better even with many of the same plot beats. Like, if they had just fleshed these quests out more and not have gone with some bullshit twist to throw away any and all build up to that point, gah, it's literally painful. The Stormblood Paladin quests, which are level 60 to 70, are a huge improvement over both the 30 to 50 and 50 to 60 quests, as they ditch all of that horribly mismanaged Salt and Sworn bullshit and return to the Gladiators. Seriously, how the fuck did some Gladiators end up being better written and more interesting than an entire elite group of Paladins? In these quests, the player competes in the Ul Cup, a prestigious and historical gladiatorial tournament in Ul'dah that has not been held in decades. This is legitimately one huge tournament arc, and I love it for that. It's all the anime tournament arc goodness you'd expect, with the Guildmaster Milla herself doing the good old trope of, "You better not lose to anyone else because we're gonna fight in the grand final." But then, of course, Milla loses to the, quote, villain of the tournament named the Black Lotus, a mysterious man who hides his face and is dressed in, you guessed it, all black. And with their victory over Milla, it is the Black Lotus that is set to be the player's opponent in the final round. The Lotus requests to speak with the player, but that meeting is postponed after he is seen nervously talking to a sketchy Lalafell. A sketchy Lalafell in Ul'dah at a tournament, no less. Yeah, you can already see where this is going. So the Black Lotus is forced to drop out, and after looking for the strangely familiar man, he is revealed to be a disguised Aldous. Turns out he withdrew from the tournament to save a young boy he met during his travels, and that he'd only come back in the first place to face off against the player to test their skills. And in true anime tournament arc fashion, we have our main conflict, which we resolve quickly by saving the boy and getting the people responsible for his kidnapping thrown in prison. With all that sorted, Milla miraculously gets the Ul Cup final reinstated, and the match between the player and Aldous is set to occur. However, some asshole then reveals Aldous' true identity to the audience, but despite being banned from the Coliseum, Nanamo herself allows the match to continue. I don't like Lalafells, but I do like this little royal potato. The player emerges victorious after a hard battle, and Nanamo grants Aldous a royal pardon, giving him the happy ending he deserved. But despite this, Aldous chooses to continue his travels, and the questline draws to an end. So that's the Stormblood Paladin quests. While not exceptional, they are returned to form and a natural continuation of the 1 to 30 quests, giving more closure to that questline. As for the story on its own, it's a bunch of high-octane duels and a stereotypical anime tournament arc, so while it is no masterpiece of storytelling, it's pretty damn solid and there isn't really anything I would change about it. That is going to be where I leave the story section of this video, and I will not be going over the single Shadowbringers Paladin quests. Instead, I will leave that for a separate video as I feel it doesn't add enough to this one to be worth including, so let's move on to the next section of this video, all about artifact gear. Alright, so in this section of the video, I'll just be showing off the different job artifact gear that you get throughout the process of leveling Paladin and doing the job quests. I'll be talking about every set except the Shadowbringers one, as I feel that everything about the Shadowbringers leveling experience and how it handles its quests is far too different to include here. So, starting off with the first Paladin gear that you obtain, which is the Gallant set. This set is one of the few things that truly survived the end of 1.0, having been present there and carried over for players to once again obtain in ARR. This set is about as stereotypical Paladin as they come, being plate mail that is very white and extravagant with some detailing in other colors. I personally really like this set, and once you get the sword and shield which go along with it, which are of course obtained separately, it really completes the look and all around makes it look really awesome. Even if I've never been a huge fan of the whole holy warrior aesthetic, which this really leans into. This is also one of the few armor sets that I think objectively looks the best on Elezen, who normally look like clowns in the majority of the gear in the game. I chose the wrong race. However, nowadays when it's put on the high-res character models, it really starts to show its age with some extremely splotchy detailing and textures. And that is really disappointing, but to be expected considering the armor was made for a PS3 game and saved from 1.0. The other Paladin set you obtain by working through the ARR Paladin quest is the Valor set. If I remember correctly, this set was not originally obtained by completing the level 50 job quest, and was only added as a reward from those quests at the launch of Heavensward to make it easier for new players to get through the 2.x patches, which were significantly longer and more of a pain in the ass than today. Interesting bit of game history in my opinion. As for the set itself, since it was originally a Tombstone acquired gear set as an upgrade to the Gallant set, it is simply a recolor, as is obvious by its appearance alone. I personally prefer this set to the Gallant one, as I think the white plate parts of the armor, along with the tabard now being in a nice blue, makes the set stand out much more and the colors look just amazing together. But due to it being a recolor, this pretty much is the only difference, as the armor suffers from the same issue of having pixely and splotchy textures, along with kinda looking out of place on the newer character models. And the one downside this set does have is that it does not look nearly as good with the Cortana and Holy Shield, but I'm pretty sure it is made to go along with the completed ARR relic, which I'm working on but don't have yet. Now then, the set you get from completing the Heavensward Paladin quest is actually a major reason why I hate that quest line. I personally believe this set looks like absolute dog shit in pretty much every conceivable way, not to mention the textures and the model of this set is actually worse than both the ARR sets, which is almost unbelievable, but it's sadly the truth. The headpiece that is basically two wings coming out of your forehead looks stupid. The chest piece continues this winged look on the shoulders and just looks terrible, and getting rid of those alone and making them more akin to the shoulders in the ARR sets would make this set look much better. As for the lower part, I think that the area around the hips is far too intricate and makes it look more ornate and like ceremonial armor rather than one fit for battle. And the shield just looks like some random carapace with gold attached to it and is super, like, unbelievably low res. But I do have to give credit where credit is due though. The sword, sabatons, and gloves look incredible and are great with other sets, but that's a drop of water in an overall sea of shit. I think this set is absolutely terrible and hated it so much when I first got it a year ago I discarded it. I'm not even joking, I discarded artifact gear. Moving on to the final set I'll be talking about today, and that is the Chivalrous set, acquired by completing the Stormblood job quest. And despite it being mysteriously pixelated in many areas for a set that came out after PS3 support was killed, this is an incredible looking set and by far and away my favorite when not counting the Endwalker Paladin set. The Chivalrous set not only has a name perfectly suiting Paladins, but all the white lighter cloth armor looks absolutely beautiful with the black highlights and small multicolored detailing. The parts that are made of metal like the gloves and boots fit fantastically with the cloth looking surcoats. The cape on the back looks great with a really ornate embroidered shield design, and the sword and shield of the set both look great, especially the sword, which is probably my favorite job artifact weapon that I've seen. I don't like the headpiece, but I've never been a huge fan of headpieces or helmets, so that doesn't mean much. Until the Endwalker set comes out, this is definitely the definitive Paladin set, in my opinion at least. Now then, I've been talking a lot for I don't even know how long, and we're just getting to the most important thing about the class. How does it play? Well, overall, despite being simple, Paladin is really fun, easy to pick up, and I think it's fair to say is the most versatile tank with the most to offer to a party, so they're always good to have around. Also, thanks to that versatility, they are a fantastic class to go back and soul old content with. So if you're looking for a class to mount grind on, this is probably your best bet out of any. And if that wasn't already enticing enough, while other classes are built around their job gauge, Paladins is seemingly just tacked on with a good defensive to keep your cooldowns rolling, as well as two situational abilities giving it even more utility. So that's yet another thing you really don't have to worry about on a Paladin. Paladins are battle mages, so their rotation revolves around two distinct phases, the sword phase and the spell phase, which flow from one to another very distinctly. It's an entirely static rotation with no changes to it other than attacked OGCDs weaved in every now and again. Sword phase consists of two combos. You have a dot and a damage combo, and the entire phase is dot, damage, dots, and then you move on to the spell phase, which is even simpler. For your spell phase, you start with Requiescat, which gives you 12 seconds of instant cast. So you use 4 Holy Spirit or 4 Holy Circle, depending on if it's a single target or AoE, and then you finish it off with the heavy-hitting AoE attack Confiteor. Once Confiteor has been used, you just restart at the beginning of your sword phase and rinse and repeat. So looking at only the GCDs, it's a simple 18 button press rotation with only 8 unique buttons to press. Though that is not counting Fight or Flight, which is a damage buff, as well as 3 additional attack OGCDs, but I'm not going to go into depth on that. Also in that instant cast phase you can mix Clemency, which is Paladin's healing spell if needed, but that is purely situational, and assuming the healer is alive and at least semi-competent, you won't be needing this very often. I personally really like this rotation as it is complicated enough to still be interesting and not boring to play when doing high-end content, but it is simple enough that it is a super nice class to kick back and relax on while running dungeons or doing other content where you can just turn your brain off and play pretty well even if you're relatively new to the class. And if you're raiding, and especially if progging, the simple rotation allows you to focus and keep your mind on upcoming mechanics or mitigation, and it's almost like a training wheels class in that regard. But even despite being a training wheels class, there are definitely moments where Paladin can be decently challenging and make you feel like a complete badass. The moment jumping to mind for me being the final boss in the Hero's Gauntlet and getting to solo the boss, which feels so incredible and involved on Paladin that I have always hoped the rest of the party dies there. And I've soloed it down from 80% multiple times, so I definitely find it fun and not something that gets annoying. And I think that leads perfectly into how exactly the rotation is in action, as it's one thing to look at a rotation standing still and another to look at it while actually doing a fight with mechanics. Overall, it's pretty damn easy with not a huge amount of interruptions, and thanks to the magical phase being able to be executed at range, you don't find yourself simply hitting the weak ranged attack button over and over again like other tanks, especially when forced out of melee range. Instead, you might have to go to the spell phase earlier and possibly missing a dot, but it's still a lot more DPS than just spamming shield lob. And even if you don't have a spell phase ready, you can simply hardcast Holy Spirit, and that's worst case scenario, but you don't get a configure if you do that. There are very few things that will truly break your rotation on Paladin, even if everything is super hectic. And it is super easy to recover and get back into the proper rotation, and having hard-hitting spells at range does add to my personal enjoyment of the class and strengthen my only half-joking argument that Paladin is the best class in the game. I mean, just compare it to Gunbreaker, which is the highest damage tank and Paladin's closest equivalent, with that also being the off tank. If you're forced out of melee range on Gunbreaker, you literally only have Lightning Shot, which is 150 potency on the GCD, while Paladin's Holy Spirit is 350 potency on the GCD, and even if you run out of mana, Shield Lob, which is the Lightning Shot equivalent, is still 120 potency on Paladin. I briefly touched on Paladin's job gauge a moment ago, but Paladin's oath gauge is very simple. It generates up to a maximum 100 with each auto attack your character lands, growing it by an integer of 5. You have 3 abilities bound to the oath gauge, those being Sheltron, Intervention, and Cover. Sheltron is an amazing little mitigation ability for Paladins as it blocks roughly 25 to 30% of all incoming attacks and lasts 6 seconds. This puts it dead in the middle of Paladin's other 2 main mitigation abilities in Rampart and Sentinel, which are 20 and 30% respectively, and last for 20 and 15 seconds also respectively. By using an entire gauge solely on Sheltron, which is often what you will end up doing, that is a full 12 seconds of 20 to 30% mitigation, which is just as good as the main 2 CDs, and is effectively a third one to roll between them to keep your mitigation up. The other 2 abilities are used far less often, but are still cool. Cover applies what is basically invulnerability as well as anti-knockback to the targeted party member for a full 12 seconds, at the expense that all of the damage and knockback is applied to the Paladin who used that spell. So while this can be useful in certain scenarios, it is rarely ever used as it is normally not worth it. And then there's Intervention, which is applied to another party member and reduces their damage taken by 10% for 6 seconds, or by closer to 60% if Rampart or Sentinel is currently active. At first glance, this may seem incredibly useful, but it takes away 6 seconds of Sheltron from you, the tank, who is supposed to be taking all of the damage. So you find yourself in a scenario where Intervention seems to be the only solution to your problem. Someone in the party has probably severely fucked up and is better off being on the floor awaiting a res. So yeah, don't use this one. Now, while Paladin is the class I play by far and away the most, do take all my opinions that I have given in this section of the video with a grain of salt. But with the vast majority of people I've spoken to about Paladin stuff, they roughly had the same opinion on those things, so I think it's a bit more credible than just one random guy on the internet. The final thing I'll be going over today is the overall Paladin leveling experience, at least how it is now, which is the same as when I first leveled it. There may be some major overhaul of some kind in Endwalker that makes this section completely irrelevant, but I doubt it, as by what we know, Paladin really isn't going to change all that much in the next expansion. So while normally when you think of the FF14 leveling experience, it is probably tied in your mind to the MSQ and job quests, well, I'm not even going to touch on those, as the job quests have been roughly half of this video already, and I have a whole series talking about the MSQ. Instead, I'll be focusing on how the class progresses as you go through the leveling, which is something that varies wildly from class to class. Paladin progresses pretty smoothly overall, with your toolkit gradually growing as time goes on, and your rotation becoming more and more fleshed out. What is also great is the way that you actually have abilities that become augmented through traits, so it not only gives the player more ways to play and more things they can do, but also keeps things fresh when the game isn't quite ready to give you that big ability it is still withholding at that point. However, up until level 50, Paladin is a complete snooze fest, and if I was leveling it now that I've played more MMOs and leveled other classes, I would honestly be borderline miserable. Disregarding the role actions you are given as a tank, of which half will feel useless to the player until they reach endgame and truly learn the class, you gain so few abilities that actually feel useful in lower level content. And with the player not having enough buttons to make gameplay feel interesting, plus having to play through ARR, which for people who don't like 50 hours of world building will probably feel boring on its own, it is no wonder why ARR and the leveling within it is the biggest wall for new players. Once you hit 50, the class feels fun. At 60, it has more depth. At 70, it is more varied and interesting. And at 80, it's an absolute blast. But getting there is the issue, especially when as the years have gone by, the abilities you pick up are more and more sparse. That's one of the main reasons I'm such a big advocate of a level squish post-Endwalker, but that's unrelated. Surprisingly enough, when the player enters Sastasha for the first time at level 15, they actually have a pretty okay toolkit. They have 7 buttons, 5 of which are attacks. A 1-2 combo that is the base of the sword phase even at max level, an AoE, shield bash which is still useless even at this level, and a basic AoE. This isn't bad for a first dungeon toolkit, but it doesn't really get better from there. Jumping to level 30 and assuming the player has their job stone, you have an additional 2 buttons. 2 extra buttons in 15 levels. That's literally double entering Sastasha and they only have an extra 2 buttons. One that completes their combo of a 1-2-3 and an OGCD attack. In the MSQ, that is 5 dungeons without any real change in how the class plays. And this is the place where you would argue that, well, there are role actions mixed in, so it makes it more interesting. Well, at level 30 you have Rampart, Low Blow, Provoke, Interject, and Reprisal. Rampart is your bog standard cooldown, and at this point you don't roll cooldown, so it's more of an oh shit, I've hit 50% health button. Low Blow is a stun on a 30-second timer and it lasts 5 seconds. Voke is something you shouldn't even have to worry about using at this point considering you're in a 4-man dungeon. Interject is used so rarely even at max level, and Reprisal is just a damage down. It does speed up right after 30, but only really starts to take off at 45. Between level 30 and 45 you get an extra 4 buttons, which is quite a bit more, but it still isn't until level 50 that the class even feels playable beyond just spamming 1-2-3, 1-2-3. And after 50, you are attaining a core ability to Paladin's identity and utility every 4 levels. So if you're looking to level a Paladin, as with many things in this game, it gets great after ARR, but getting through ARR can definitely be a slog. I do still recommend leveling a Paladin as it is a great class and leveling it is a completion metric, but I don't envy anyone going through the early leveling. I mean, at least the Gladiator job quests will probably keep you thoroughly entertained, so those are a reason to push through the early slog. So that's Paladin, or at least a pretty in-depth overview of it. Overall, I love this class and have been extremely lucky that the first one I tried is what really clicked with me and has stayed as my main, which I think only enhanced my experience of playing through 14. The job quests are a mixed bag, and the same goes for the gear, and the leveling experience could definitely be better, but the gameplay of Paladin is, in my opinion, super engaging, but also super easy to kick back and play. I really just love it to bits. This is my first time making a video like this, and I think it turned out okay, and I consider making similar videos for other classes depending on how this one does. So if you have any ideas for how this kind of video could be better, please let me know. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It really does help out a lot in so many different ways, and I'm not talking about feeding my ego. But the video is already long enough, so I'll end it here. As always, my name is Lokidum, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.